One morning early in 1913, Hardy found, among the letters on his breakfast table, a large, untidy envelope decorated with Indian stamps. When he opened it, he found sheets of paper, by no means fresh, on which, in a non-English holograph, were line after line of symbols.
Hello and welcome to Maths on the Move, the podcast from plus.maths.org. I'm Marianne Freiberger. This week we continue the mini-series of podcasts that we started last week, all about mathematics coming to life on stage and on film. You just heard from Victoria Gould reading from the foreword to G.H. Hardy's famous book, A Mathematician's Apology. We already met Victoria in last week's podcast talking about her career as an actress and mathematician. But in this episode, revisit our interview with Victoria and the mathematician Marcus DuSautoy, who is a professor of mathematics and also the Charles Simonyi Professor of Public Understanding of Science at the University of Oxford. My colleague Rachel Thomas spoke to both of them in 2008 about a play called A Disappearing Number, produced by Complicité. The play was inspired by the remarkable mathematical collaboration between Hardy and the mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan. The foreword Victoria was reading was written by C.P. Snow and describes the day Hardy received his first letter from Ramanujan. It was this scene and the poetic descriptions of mathematics by Hardy in his book that inspired Simon McBurney, the artistic director of Complicité, to create a show based on Ramanujan and Hardy's story and the mathematics they created. Victoria and Marcus were both involved in the development of the show, and in this podcast Rachel talks to them about their experience. But first, let's hear the rest of C.P. Snow's description of Hardy's day.
That particular day, though, while the timetable wasn't altered, internally things were not going according to plan. At the back of his mind, getting in the way of his complete pleasure in his game, the Indian manuscript nagged away. Wild theorems such as he had never seen before nor imagined. A fraud of genius? A question was forming itself in his mind. As it was Hardy's mind, the question was forming itself with epigrammatic clarity. Is a fraud of genius more probable than an unknown mathematician of genius? Clearly, the answer was no. Back in his rooms at Trinity, he had another look at the script. He sent word to Littlewood that they must have a discussion after Hall. Apparently, it did not take them long. Before midnight, they knew, and knew for certain, the writer of these manuscripts was a man of genius. It started as many wonderful things have, as an idea in Simon McBurney's fantastic head. It was given the book by his friend Michael Ondaatje, who's a brilliant poet, called A Mathematician's Apology, which was G.H. Hardy's swan song, I suppose, the book he wrote towards the end of his career, wrestling with what mathematics was and what it meant to him and how real it was. And it's a very, very beautiful book, and it deals a lot with his collaboration with Srinivasa Ramanujan, who is an Indian mathematician. It has a very beautiful foreword by C.P. Snow, which describes the day when G.H. Hardy received the letters from Ramanujan. And so by the end of that evening, Hardy realised that he had discovered a genius, and it was a very beautiful story about Ramanujan coming to Cambridge and collaborating with Hardy, and that was really the kernel of the play that Simon wanted to make, and we spent really a couple of years exploring it and devising it, and we worked with some marvellous people, with the musician Nitin Sawhney and the dancer Akram Khan and all sorts of people, and we got a company together. And we kind of teased out this extraordinary show, which is about their collaboration, but it's also about, there are other stories in the show set in the modern world. And what we really didn't want to do was do a kind of exposition of mathematics. We wanted to somehow embody the maths within the stories and within the music and the rhythms and the space of the show. We wanted it to be a mathematical experience as well as a theatrical one.
Marcus DuSautoy was involved in the development of the play when Complicité asked him to come in to explain some of the mathematics done by Hardy and Ramanujan. I asked Marcus exactly what made their mathematical collaboration quite so remarkable. Hardy's discovery of Ramanujan and his work was quite unusual because, as written in the book, he was used to receiving many manuscripts written with wild theorems, but he gradually realised that Ramanujan's work was a work of genius. What kind of work had Ramanujan done at that stage, and what kind of work did he and Hardy manage to do together?
Well, for me, what Hardy recognised was that Ramanujan had basically reconstructed on his own a huge swathe of 19th century mathematics. The mathematics that Riemann had developed to understand prime numbers was clearly something that Ramanujan had understood. I told them about this 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 all the way up to infinity equals -1/12. It was something that I wrote about in my book, The Music of the Primes, and I think they thought this was just so weird. But, what Hardy recognised in that statement is that Ramanujan had been able to do something called the analytic continuation of the Riemann zeta function, to be able to write down that formula. He had no proof backing it up. He didn't explain it, but that was very much the style of Indian mathematics, is that you produce the results and not all the workings out, as it were. So Hardy recognised the genius of Ramanujan to be able to do this without ever having seen it before. I mean, it had taken European mathematicians centuries to get to that level. But Hardy was excited about prime numbers. He was working on the Riemann hypothesis. He was trying to make breakthroughs on primes. And here was Ramanujan writing to him saying he'd had made breakthroughs and that he had a formula which could calculate the number of primes with a remarkable degree of accuracy. Now, it turned out that Ramanujan hadn't quite done all that he thought he'd been able to do. He didn't really understand that there were things called complex zeros of the Riemann zeta function. So Hardy realised he had to bring him up to speed with what the state of knowledge was at the moment. But I think it was the primes that got them excited. But I think the really stunning breakthroughs were on this thing called the partition function. The mathematicians of that period were looking for approximations for the number of partitions, just in the same way as we were understanding an approximation for the number of primes up to any large number. But Ramanujan was still brought up. Hardy used to compare him almost to an Euler, that Euler was still giving very precise formulas for things, and Ramanujan just believed there should be a formula for the number of partitions. And it was, in mathematics, what you need is almost that arrogant confidence to push you through to find an answer. Often it's a little bit like with too much knowledge you can count yourself out of the problem, and Ramanujan, almost his innocence, almost a bit like I often compare it to something like Parsifal. The innocent fool is the person who's able to slay the dragon. It's those who know fear who cannot make progress. So Ramanujan had this confidence, which Hardy just didn't understand where he was getting that confidence from. But it was the combination of them, and that's what's so beautiful. Is you needed the analytic mind of Hardy, who understood proof and how to explain something, and you needed that almost amazing intuition that Ramanujan had to make those leaps into the unknown and sort of join up the dots.
A mathematician, like a painter or a poet, is a maker of patterns. If his patterns are more permanent than theirs, it is because they are made with ideas. The mathematician's patterns, like the painter's or the poet's, must be beautiful. The way that Simon works at Complicité, and he is extraordinarily kind of brave in this way, I think, is to bring in a lot of interesting people, interesting elements into one enormous room and just play. I mean, he calls it coming to play, so that brings people in to play. So we had a huge number of people throughout the process coming in, but very specifically. And we also had in the room, we have costumes, we have a very brilliant sound designer who can just bring you whatever you want to. And we also have fantastic visual artists. We have a video designer, and and analysing people all in the room together, working very much together, so that if you can really throw open your ideas to almost anything that could happen in the room. And he brought together dancers and musicians. But we would talk about extraordinary things. We would literally spend a whole day talking about the difference of two squares, or and physicalising that. Marcus came in a lot and helped. Yeah, he was part of the process.
You were involved with Complicité in developing the show A Disappearing Number. Could you tell us something about the process of developing the show?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very organic process that Complicité use, and it's my time with them, it's felt very much like doing mathematical research in a collaborative way. Each person brings different ideas, and it's almost like building a ladder. Just one person creating a script would never get as far as all of these people. You create different rungs. And actually, I think when they brought me in, they thought they were just going to use me for an afternoon of a bit of maths, I think. But what they didn't realise was that I'm a complete Complicité nut, a really big fan. And I'd done work with them in the 80s, actually, when I was working with a community theatre in Oxford. And I just love the way that they work. It's for me, they treat the theatrical space like a magical space, which can do something that you cannot do on television or in film. And so you want to celebrate theatre for what it's special at, and that really appealed to me. And it's something that I feel is rather like the magical space of mathematics, that it is somewhere where you can do things which you can't do in reality. And so what they were interested in was embedding mathematics into the play. They didn't want it just to be a play about mathematicians, which it can so easily be. They're interesting characters, Hardy and Ramanujan, but with fantastic stories. But Simon McBurney wanted to go beyond that and try and embed mathematics in the structure of the play. I mean, I've done a lot of theatre in my background and done a lot of workshopping and theatre games, so I was quite sensitive to the way Complicité works. So I tried to come up with the sessions that I did with them with games that were theatrical, which explored the mathematics. And there's a very easy one in some sense, which is the partition function, which is something that Ramanujan and Hardy were very successful in analysing. The partition of a number is a way of writing a number as sums of smaller numbers. So 5 I can write as 4 plus 1, or 3 plus 1 plus 1, or 3 plus 2. And, well, you can do that. It's a beautiful exercise in the theatre. You take 5 actors and you ask them to find all the different ways that they can group themselves. They can be 5 individuals, or they can be 5 as a group, or 4 together and 1 left out. And it creates a beautiful dynamic if you explore that. And just the different ways that people brought out the dynamics of the partition function through theatre was magical.
I think one of the things I thought seeing it was that embodiment of the mathematical ideas. There's a lot of play on the language used to describe or to name mathematics, such as partitions or decomposition, and their understanding in normal English language and their understanding mathematically. And I thought that was one of the really interesting things, the idea of bringing mathematics as part of
the human condition.
The human condition, yeah.
There was another theme in the show which is that of a convergent series, and we looked a lot at the series, the summation of 1 over 2 to the n, and it was 1 to infinity, which is 1 plus a half plus a quarter plus which sums to 2 but never actually gets there. And a lot of the actors were completely freaked by that sense of asymptotic relationships, which mathematicians are used to, but that sense of two people, it says a lot to me about the human condition, that you can never actually reach somebody else, however hard you try it. The ideas, like the colours or the words, must fit together in a harmonious way. It may be very hard to define mathematical beauty, but that is just as true of beauty of any kind. We may not know quite what we mean by a beautiful poem, but that does not prevent us from recognising one when we read it. You really have to be prepared to make a complete hit of yourself, and also to just be open to anything happening. And yeah, I remember making a mad piece where we were wearing blue plastic bags on our heads to do, again, Irrationality of Route 2, potty things. But when something is really right and beautiful, you kind of know. And I know that Simon in the play, and when he makes theatre, is looking for that moment when all the audience will kind of have come together in terms of having the same image or the same sense of being together in the room in their heads when they're telling a story. And for me, that's very analogous to the way that mathematicians work. Is, quite a lot of the time you're just doing stuff which is not going to work, which is rubbish. But when something is right, you do know. And for me, it's about that idea of, I talked about self-consistency. That when something is right, there is a consensus that it's right. And when a piece of theatre is beautiful, there's a consensus. You can feel it in the audience. You can feel it in the air. I mean, that's why I prefer theatre to film. And the sort of universality of that people actually. Everybody likes the same things. Everybody loves the same stories. Everybody, that we know what brings us together. And I feel that about maths. I think maths is something that brings people together. It's something we have in common, in the same way that a piece of theatre brings people together.
And were you able to identify with this idea of Hardy talks about it in his book, and the people from Complicité talked about it, the idea of there being a beauty that you can recognise in mathematics which equals truth, essentially, and that you know when you're going in the right direction, whether you're producing theatre or whether you're doing mathematics, by you're finding something beautiful, or the way that you're getting there is beautiful. I mean, do you find that in your own research work?
I think it is a very important factor in choosing the right direction to go in. I mean, it's amazing. That's why in mathematics I find a much more satisfying subject than biology, which is much messier and somehow doesn't have necessarily that same sense of beauty equals truth. Of course, it doesn't always work. I worked on a conjecture for 10 years, which was really would have been beautiful had it been true. It was a beautiful symmetry happening in certain polynomials that I was working on, and then my PhD student came in one day and showed me the whole thing didn't work, and they produced an example where it didn't have this symmetry. So you have to be careful searching for that idea of simplicity and beauty always equaling the truth, because it's not necessarily.
What did it feel like when something that you've been working on for such a long time realised that wasn't going to work out?
Well, of course, devastating to start with, because I, seem to have wasted so much time spending 10 years working on that. But then there's always a silver lining. There was actually much more interesting texture there because of that, the fact that sometimes it didn't work. And then it became a process of understanding, well, why did it work in so many cases and not in these other cases? So sometimes there's a richness appears out of something which is a little bit more complex. So what's interesting, I do a lot of work with other creative artists in the theatre, music, dance, sculpture, painting. And when I talk to artists, I'm always interested to know whether they have a sense of, is there a right answer for them? And quite often there is. I mean, I've talked to novelists, and they have that sense that suddenly everything clicks together because it is like a moment in a proof where you've joined up things. You throw away a chapter and then it just totally makes sense.
It was really nice to watch the play as well, because it really brought home that feeling, which I guess I've always felt, that mathematics is sometimes closer to creative arts or philosophy or than it is to some of the other science subjects. I mean, is that something that you've found, particularly with your collaborations with other artists?
It's the reason I became a mathematician, because I read Hardy's Mathematician's Apology when I was at school. It was one of the books my mathematics teacher recommended to me, which changed my whole course. I was going to do languages, I was interested in playing music, I was doing theatre, and I wasn't really into getting my hands messy with a load of chemicals. And then suddenly I read this book, and it said maths is a creative art, not a useful science. Hardy was doing maths for the beauty of it. He didn't want it to be applied. Applied was degraded mathematics. And, this was just what I wanted to hear. And that's why I decided I think I can be a mathematician that looks consistent with my love of the things that I love. So I totally recognise that. And that's why I really enjoy spending time with creative artists like Complicité or like the project I'm doing with Dorothy Carr, a composer, about Borges, because there is so much in common between the way we think and our goals, I think.
You've just been made the Professor of Public Understanding of Science, following on from Richard Dawkins. I mean, do you think that this is maybe a message that you might try and bring through that position, the idea that maths is so interconnected not just with the other sciences but with arts as well?
Yeah, very much so. I think if Dawkins' mission was about connections between science and religion or not, I think my real passion is about connections between science and the arts. And I think 2009 is an exciting year actually because it's a celebration of the 50 years of C.P. Snow's lecture on the two cultures, which said that in England, either you're a humanist or you're a scientist, but never the twain shall meet. And it's quite acceptable for somebody to say they hate science. And so I think that it'd be great if we make 2009 a platform in a way for bringing together these disciplines and showing how that they can benefit each other. Very often it's the scientists who are telling the artists interesting new structures. And I think the challenge is to get artists making scientists think in new ways which might give them breakthroughs. We can often get very blinkered in the way we're looking at a problem. Maybe somebody from the arts can ask a question of us that will open up a subject for us. So, I think that we want genuine dialogue, I think, between the arts and the sciences.
Have you ever had that experience of one of your interactions with poets or composers or theatre productions has informed your own work?
Well, yes, I think there was my work on Borges and this story, the Library of Babel, which is basically a description of a geometric space. And reading that story makes you think, well, what is the shape of this library? And I've started to ask questions of myself, which I've never thought of before, about the geometry of paths through a four-dimensional shape, which may have been studied already, but I'm not sure whether they have or not. But for me, they were new questions which came up out of reading this book with this choreographer and composer. And so they were new questions that I hadn't thought of before, which came out of that collaboration.
I know we were all very excited when you were made professor, because we kind of felt like this was a new stage for mathematics, and I think the importance of mathematics is starting to become accepted, but still obviously there's that massive stereotype in the fact that people are very happy to say I hate maths is boring, where they would never say that about even some of the sciences, but particularly about literature or reading or something. I mean, are you keen to make mathematics part of the main platform of that professorship, or is it important for you to cross all the sciences when you do that work?
No, I think, I have to be honest to who I am. I am a mathematician, and I think, I'm only one person, and that job, I cannot speak for the whole of science, and I think it's important that people recognise that, it's not my job to talk about all of science, and I think I see it as my role to encourage other scientists from other disciplines to join in trying to communicate. But I think mathematics is a great choice for this chair, because I think mathematics is a language which underpins so many of the other sciences. You can't understand what's happening in the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, without mathematics. That's what's making those predictions about what we're going to see next. Evolutionary biology as well. There's a lot of mathematics which hides behind that, about population growths, the behaviour of that, climate change. They're big mathematical questions, and I think that will be the interesting thing, to show how mathematics is embedded as fundamental to all of the other sciences.
So it sounds like quite an exciting time then for mathematics then.
I think it is an exciting time, and I think there's an appetite for it. That play sold out. Complicité have a big cult following. On the other hand, this was a play about maths, but it sold out at the Barbican the first run, it sold out the second run, it won the Olivier Best Play Award, and it's touring across the world. And I think that's, people have an appetite to access this world, which I think, as you say, people understand the other sciences a little better. But that's what makes mathematics therefore interesting, because people don't really know what we're doing, and I think they'd quite like to know.
That's all we have time for in this episode of Maths on the Move. If you'd like to find out more about the play A Disappearing Number, or about the career of Victoria Gould as both an actress and a mathematician, go to plus.maths.org and use the search facility. We've also included relevant links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.